there's Florida, especially since recently 15 mayors from Florida were, telling Bush and Rubio that they wanted to meet with them to talk about rising sea levels. So I'd be interested to see how much they have to talk about that more.
And even though the fossil fuel industry loves pointing out the polls showing that most people don't think climate change is among the top issues for them in this election cycle, other polls also show that people generally are also concerned, at least, a majority of Americans. So it could definitely be, that differentiating issue. And if, hypothetically you have a Clinton nominee and she moves a little bit to the right than she is now when it comes to environmental issues, she could, anger some environmentalists, but also appear to the rest of the country perhaps to be the more reasonable choice, talk about, different energy choices, and at the same time express concern about climate change.
Okay. More all the above, I suppose.
Well, I was just going to comment that I've probably been an environmental journalist for something like 8 elections. I haven't counted it up, but it never has been an important issue for the candidates or the voters, and I still don't think it is. And I don't really know what will drive it to be. If it's not climate change, it's not. If that can't do it, I don't think anything can do it.
Well, we may need to have another Katrina in order to put it back front and center before the public's consciousness. Who
I don't think
knows?
that'll do it either.
It may not. It may not. I'm reminded from some of Matt's discussion, your presence in California, and your focus here that drought and those kinds of climate-related issues are not limited only to the left coast of the United States. What are we looking at in terms of global issues there?
Certainly the drought in California has gotten a lot of coverage, but it's not the only place that a severe drought is occurring. Many of you might be aware of the severe drought in Central and South America, which gets very little coverage, where it's actually affecting people's health. People are dying in places like Colombia and Brazil and places like that because of the lack of water. And certainly for National Geographic, we take a more global approach to things like drought. There's severe droughts exacerbated by climate change. There's so many places of the world that are suffering like that are not getting the attention that California is.
Okay. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here. You've gotten some free political punditry here from folks who don't normally cover campaigns. I hope all the political reporters and consultants out there were listening. And now I think it's time to open it up to let you all ask the questions that we should have asked, but we didn't. And I'm going to call on you. If you raise your hand, I'll try to get to everybody. Please identify yourself when you're called upon. Wait for the microphone to get to you so that we're recording this and streaming it, so we want to be sure we get your question. Make it a question, not a speech, if you would, please. No big wind-ups. And we'll try to get to all the questions. So let's start with this gentleman in the second row here with the red tie. If you would stand up so they can find you with the microphone. You're right there.
Hi, Dan Delury with the Wedgmere Group. It's a firm that specializes in the intersection of smart grid and some of the new technologies and climate change. So back to the campaign for just a moment. If each of you were moderating the Republican debate, how would you frame your question on climate change?
Who wants to take that one? First one to raise their hand.
I would take time crafting it, so I'm not going to do it off the cuff.
Right.
All right. Anybody else? Dean.
I think I would probably try to keep it simple. Like a question like that, depending on who the nominees turn out to be, I would ask if it sounds too simple, but given who we'd have on that stage most likely, I would ask them if didn't mean that to be funny per se. Is climate change real, and do we need to do anything about it? And I would keep it really simple because I think there's a different answer there from the two candidates. And when we were talking about Hillary Clinton, it occurred to me that the other issue that that the Supreme Court case brings up is the whole move to push her on climate change and to the left, This is what Sanders sort of does in this race, but it raises this issue. What exactly are the tools that a Democrat can bring to bear if they succeed President Obama? If the Supreme Court strikes down the EPA Clean Power Plan, then what is Hillary Clinton in that case proposing to do? What are the tools that she has available to go further than this president? So it may box her in a debate in terms of really being able to offer something that really thrills her base and says, she can take this agenda further. So that might have that impact.
If that happens, so then we'll have tried cap and trade and we'll have tried EPA. It's going to be carbon tax.
Mhm.
I mean, I think that the momentum's been building already, intellectually, for some time.
A Republican would vote for a tax?
They don't like the EPA regulations very much. I would argue that EPA regulations are more resisted on the political right than a carbon tax would be. I grant you that it will receive a lot of criticism, but it will also have all these surprising allies.
Real quick on the question, I would specify whether they think human beings and their activity is having any effect on climate change, why or why not, and if so, if they do think, what would they do about it? We're seeing a lot of course I believe in climate change, but then when you ask them about human activity, that's the
I'm not a scientist.
I would take it beyond that. I would take it beyond the scientific argument. I mean, asking politicians about science. I don't think it works. I think I would ask, what's the future of fossil fuels under your reign? Ask a question like that.
Okay. All right, all you debate moderators, take note. Let's see. This lady here right in the front, and I'm going to jump to the back. In the red scarf. Identify yourself, please.
Judy Mayotte, former professor at Marquette University and Seattle University. We are watching in our world today millions and millions of people being displaced because of conflict, but I wonder where you see the importance of the millions more that are being displaced because of extreme weather events and because of environmental issues. And what is your responsibility in building awareness of this situation for millions of people?
That's very much a top issue for National Geographic. I mean, obviously, we have Geographic in our name. We're fashioning stories now about extreme weather and what it does for migration, people's migration patterns, people moving from the farms into the cities and what that's going to mean. The social implications of that, the economic implications. So what we have now is, because of the severe droughts exacerbated by climate change and the flooding, the patterns of flooding, you have people who are moving around. And it's a huge issue. I think it's one of the biggest environmental issues that needs much more attention right now.
Are there connections between that and the violence?
Yeah,
the conflicts?
Definitely. I mean, part of it, we have issues of migration, but they're not simple. People don't just migrate just because of a drought or just because of a flood. There's also violence and war and all kinds of economic reasons, and so untangling it. But there's no doubt that the extreme weather events are exacerbating that and one of the drivers of migration.
So I wrote about this. I don't know how many other people did, but in the proposed budget from the president this week, there was $400 million for Alaskan communities that are particularly imperiled by climate change, and the text said, including for relocation. So I don't know that money is going to be appropriated or really happen, but $400 million is a serious amount because these relocations have been estimated to be over $100 million for sort of a village of the size of 400 people. Some of them do need to move. So this is actually becoming a topic in the United States, and HUD just actually gave some money to move a Louisiana community in a low-lying place.
Right.
So,
It's not just the Arctic, it's not just the South Pacific. That's what's getting a lot of the attention, but it's a global phenomenon.
You got to be careful how you phrase that. In Maryland, after Sandy, the state offered money to Smith Islanders to move to the mainland, and they adamantly refused. So many of them aren't exactly big believers in climate change either. So, all right, Other questions? In the back here, all the way back. Stand up, lady with the right hand raised right now.
Carolina Peñalva, concerned citizen. I was just wondering what you think the response is going to be, since we're talking about global scales, to hostile environments in terms of pandemics and the spread of disease, and what can we do or will be done?
Well, I mean, the spread of mosquitoes. I mean, we've been taking a close look at that and plan on more coverage of that, of what climate change means to public health and the growth of viruses and outbreaks and the spread of mosquitoes. Huge issue.
There's a climate component to the Zika virus?
They're still debating.
Yeah.
There's suspicion, but I have not found a researcher that's willing to say
Right. There's
yes.
thoughts that it will
There's
lead to the
suspicion.
spread of mosquitoes. There's not evidence at this point that it has.
Yeah, all else being equal, they think that heat will influence the distribution of vectors, heat and moisture, heat and rainfall. But I did a long story about all the environmental factors that affect vectors last week, I think, and climate is clearly one of them, but urbanization is one of them, dams are one of them, deforestation is one of them, and then, of course, introduction of species, which we rarely talk about, is sort of the biggest one of all. And so in that sense, the pattern of disease is highly environmentally influenced. We don't really talk
By
about
us,
it very much.
as much as by
us, yeah. When I say that, yeah, it means things that we do, yeah.
Okay. Let's see, right here in the middle, gentleman in the blue shirt.
Hi there, my name's Joel Jager, and I'm with the World Resources Institute and also the New Climate Economy Project. So my question is, looking at the post-Paris landscape, it seems like one of the big questions that wasn't answered there is, where is the money coming from? Do you guys think that that will be a story this year, looking at how we're going to scale up financing for renewable energy, for sustainable infrastructure? And if that is a story, how do you think it'll play out? Thanks.
Well, we just saw the president's budget proposal have, significant funding for mission innovation and, doubling of spending on clean tech. And Congress is not, unlike other proposals from the Obama administration, coming out right away and saying they oppose it. Now, the question is going to be in the next coming months is how much they want to support it. And, there's been, even though there's some folks on Capitol Hill who are all gung-ho about fossil fuel investments, and then others who are gung-ho about renewable investments, often it's hard to find, a common ground and say, okay, let's, do more funding for carbon capture, for example, and also wind and solar. They tend to, either take from one and put to the other, take from one and put to the other. So that's definitely going to be, in the coming months, something that we'll be talking about.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
I would throw in because we went down the carbon tax rabbit hole, which is like a reporter's delight. If you have to cover climate change, make sure you learn about the carbon tax, because you'll be writing about it's coming. It's right around the corner. There's a lot of agreement on carbon tax, and particularly in the context, we have tax reporters that are very good for Bloomberg BNA, and they write about tax reform all the time. And in the context of that goes the story, you can get a carbon tax because you can reduce the taxes on wages, which we don't like to have. It's inefficient, and we can tax the things we don't want, which is carbon, and then voila, you have a policy we all can enjoy. But the problem with that is that tax reform is always just right around the corner. The other problem is that if you want to do something serious about renewable energy and at the scale that scientists say is needed, you need that kind of revenue. We could have tax incentives for wind and solar like we have in the U.S., but when you have oil prices at $27 a barrel, we now have people going out and returning to the days of buying less fuel-efficient vehicles. That's the nature of markets. So does anybody know what the best-selling vehicle month after month, year after year in the U.S. is? It is the Ford F-150. And it is more than twice the sales of a Honda Accord or any other Honda car. And so as long as that's the case, you know, if we're going to start moving to a big clean energy future, we got to find the money. It costs a lot of money, and yes, there's a lot of private investment, but you have to leverage that somehow. And in the U.S., at least, without a carbon tax, I don't know where that money's coming from.
Oh, okay. Let's see, round and round and round. The lady right over here, raise your hand. That's it. Stand up.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to thank you for your really vibrant discussion. I learned a lot, and I just have a couple of comments. My name is Rosanna Marie Neal, and I'm the director of the Sustainable World Initiative. And Marla, you mentioned that you don't know what it's going to take, you know, for people to really pay attention and for environmental issues to become, you know, a big ticket item. And I would like to know what your views are on expanding coverage of stories on what nature can sustain, you know, at the local level and at the planetary level. Not to scare people, but simply to inform them, you know, of what the capacity is of our ecosystems in terms of water, food, and energy, and also to present positive opportunities to change our impact on the planet and work with nature rather than against it.
Okay. I think you got your question there. Let's it's a sort of one of the fundamental questions of our business, isn't it? How do we make people more aware and get them to pay attention to what we cover?
I would say that's what we're all striving to do, and that we all try to do with our stories as environmental journalists. We talk about the effect on resources, the effect on public health. You have to balance that with the economy. One thing that sort of strikes the difference between an environmental journalist and a science journalist is that every time we write about a resource, there's usually some user of that resource. And so we have to explain to somebody, whether you're writing about forests, whether you're writing about oil, you're talking about the ozone standard. You can write, just writing from one perspective, the public health perspective or the environmental, the resource perspective, there's economic angles, there's financial angles, there's practical angles, there's political angles. All of this has to be in the story. You cannot write about that ozone standard without writing about how air pollution affects especially children's health, their respiratory capacity. But you also have to write about where those emissions are coming from. They're coming from your car. They're coming from your electricity. They're coming from your consumer products, the products that you're using to clean your bathroom. And that's something that we all forget, that we're all using that. It's not us against them. Often it's the consumer. And certainly when it comes to California smog standards, the big industries and the cars have been cleaned up just about as much as they can without going to totally zero emission cars. The rest of it is the stuff that we're using in our own houses. And so that's part of our mission, is to write about what the solutions are, write about your own personal impact. And hopefully if it's good environmental journalism, you're doing that.
Okay. Anybody else thoughts on that idea?
I would just add that I think droughts offer tremendous examples to do that kind of reporting, because it's a great opportunity to tell people how their water consumption habits affect the environment. The more you use personally, as well as your own personal diet, affects the environment in lots of ways that ripple throughout animal populations and different kinds of habitat. And there's lots of those things happening in California right now because the drought has been going on so long. There's all kinds of wildlife migrations taking place, species extinctions that we're on the verge of seeing happen probably this year. All of that is because the water supplies are so heavily tapped there and in such short supply.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Matt. We're getting some questions coming in from our audience. It's not just the folks in this room, but we have an online audience. Folks are actually watching us. That's scary. But this one, I can't tell whether this came from somebody in the audience or online. This is from Ryan Gross at EPA, who's asking a question rather than answering it. Ryan, I expect you to take my call the next time I get a question answered. What ocean environmental issues do you think will be the most covered this year? What are the things about the oceans that are going to be in the news, or should be?
Their temperature, probably.
More extremes?
Acidification.
Acidification and oxygen.
Well, so yeah, I mean, we have to follow up on, because of El Nino, we have to follow up on coral bleaching and the extent of that. I think we're going to get some more updates on that. Yeah, exactly. You know, how hot, the heat of the Pacific and Atlantic in relation to hurricane activity, and actually with the Atlantic, also winter storm activity. I mean, there's a lot of things to be written about there.
And there's been some impacts on fisheries, I believe, in the West
Big
Coast
impacts.
as well. Yeah.
If you're off the coast of Maine. Yeah.
Right. Okay. We'll take another one from our in-person audience here. Gentleman standing up here with I can tell whether it's white or a pink shirt. Wait for the microphone.
Frank Masano, Bracewell.
Oh, never mind.
So the Supreme Court decision obviously was a big, big decision this week. Do you think that the Supreme Court decision maybe saw some grounding in court decisions on the Waters of the U.S. rule and the previous MATS rule and some of the other challenges that have been made that have taken place over the past couple of years?
So, if I understand the question, was this the Supreme Court saying enough already? Were there, issues about those rules that had prompted them to do this, or is there, some tea leaves here that they're going to take a crack at all these other rules as well? Anybody want to hazard an answer to either one of those questions?
Well, briefly, of course, it's hard to read the court, but some of us were talking before the panel about how, for example, the MATS rule, which is a rule that, by the time the Supreme Court got to review it, a lot of its effects were already being felt. A lot of power plants had retired, and the Supreme Court there found some wrongdoing by EPA, but didn't block the rule right away, and there was a lot of jubilation in the environmental community and in the agency, and there's some speculation that the court now wants to step in and say, no, let's stop this until it is actually reviewed. So the administration won't be able to say, okay, fine, you can block it later on, but the effects will already have been felt. And even with the Supreme Court blocking the rule yesterday temporarily, a lot of utilities are saying, well, we've already started planning for it. Things are already underway. States, are already saying things are underway.
Okay. I know I'm waiting to see if the Supreme Court is going to take our Chesapeake Bay case or not. That will be the next one that I'm watching. Let's see. Back down front here. Please stand. Wait for the microphone. Tell us your name.
Thank you.
Ask your question.
Good afternoon. My name is Erica. I'm here on behalf of the Case Energy Coalition. Given the need for carbon reduction coming out of CPP and the Paris talks, what do you think the government can do to help protect nuclear energy facilities, which provide 63% of America's carbon-free energy, from shutting down in 2016?
We haven't talked about nuclear. Does anybody have any thoughts? It's another energy industry sector that's in a bit of economic trouble right now.
Well, the Paris Agreement is virtually silent on nuclear, right? So there's not a lot on nuclear in that agreement, and I will say, this is if we ever get to another round of debate in the U.S. about climate legislation, this is where the role of nuclear comes up, right? Without that, we're never going to get to a place where we're putting serious money into nuclear, or as advocates of nuclear power argue, it's recognized for its relatively carbon-free, emissions. And those of us who had to watch the cap and trade bill go down in flames recall all the money that was in that bill. For coal, number one, but for there was a big sort of giveaway to the nuclear industry in recognition for its relatively low carbon profile. So, until we get back into an environment where we can debate that, we're not going to probably be able to really say. I mean, there is no real political agreement in the U.S. right now of what the future is of nuclear power. And, and it kind of ties in a way, this lack of congressional attention or interest in a lot of what's being discussed here today is, that's where we are. That's why the Supreme Court is in this business of staying EPA regulations and such. When you take a step back, you don't have to take have an opinion about what Congress should be doing about climate legislation or what that should look like. But this is a vacuum. This is what you get when you have a vacuum of congressional attention and action. You get agencies going to work on policies that it doesn't clearly know what it's allowed to do. It has guidance on that. And then what happens if they throw it out? What happens then? At some point, I think people are probably going to be saying, I think Congress has to give some direction. What's the role of nuclear going forward? What are we doing about clean coal? Is that off the table, or are we going to talk about that? Are we going to talk about the role of coal going forward? Or are we going to keep coal in the ground? All these things can be debated in legislation. That's what Congress is paid to do. So you would think that we'll probably get to a point where that will come back up, but it seems like an obvious sort of hole in this discussion or in this debate where you have two pretty important functions or chambers of government that are not really debating anything around this right now.
Is there anything in the current energy bill, Laura, about nuclear?
Not that I'm aware of, correct me if I'm wrong, but there isn't anything in the broad energy bill on the floor right now. There's LNG exports, but not nuclear. And again, to Dean's point, the likelihood of them having a debate on this anytime soon on the Senate or House floor is really slim, given the election year, and then even in the foreseeable future, given the polarization between the two parties on these issues.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Let's see. Back here on the far right, lady with the scarf. Please stand.
Hi, I'm Diane Sines with Climate Nexus. Could one of you explain how lifting the oil export ban might influence our ability to reduce carbon emissions, and keep us below 2 degrees?
Did you hear the question? Nobody's jumping to answer. What happens if we lift the oil export ban?
Well, with some of the proponents, one of the arguments that they said is that we're relying less on certain more carbon intensive crudes that would be coming in from the outside, for example. But covering a little bit of the debate when this was going on, we also didn't foresee, or many analysts didn't foresee, that much of a major impact in the markets, at least in the short and medium term, especially with the price of oil being so low. But for example, the proponents of more domestic oil love to point out Venezuela's heavier crude and more carbon intensive crude.
But with the global market for oil being in the troughs here, there's not a whole lot of opportunity for exporting our oil elsewhere.
A lot of the hydraulic fracturing that, the boom in North Dakota, a lot of that has receded because of the low prices. And in a way, that's what Saudi Arabia, which keeps pumping, at least for now, wanted to achieve.
Okay. Next question. Let's see. Right here, this gentleman. That's you, the blue shirt.
Thanks. Andrew Deutz with the Nature Conservancy. Where should we look for hope? Chris talked about that he's going to follow the accelerating diffusion of renewable energy technologies. Where are the other positive trends or stories that we should be looking to that will give us hope that we can solve some of these problems, that we can reduce emissions, that we can adapt to climate change, that we can feed a world of 9 or 10 billion people, and that we can restore ecosystems to provide the services we need? Where should we look for hope?
You sound like my former editors.
What's working?
Is that good or bad? Well, they're not my editors anymore. I'm the editor. Yeah, it's a good question.
Well, we attempted to take that on with our climate issue that came out in November, and one of the key stories in there was taking a look at Germany and what they're doing, and they're planning on being carbon-free without even the no nuke movement is a big part of that. It will not succeed in Germany with nuclear power. So we took a close look at what Germany's doing with that as our look sort of forward as could this be a model for the rest, at least, of the developed world?
I wrote on what I published today. I think might be interpreted through this lens. I wrote a really big piece about how deforestation is the issue that's now finally sort of coming into its own as part of the climate picture. And basically, if you look at it and you look at what could be accomplished by halting or slowing deforestation, it's actually really, really massive, and you could argue in some ways easier to do. I'm not saying that we're going to have a sudden reversal, but now that it's in the Paris Climate Agreement and part of the solution, you could actually see that as being an area of hope.
Pointing to possible solutions or remedies.
Well, it's just the idea that you can change the carbon impact rather fast in the forest area compared to slowly changing the energy system. And the carbon impact of the forest area is, as I pointed out there, it's actually potentially a third.
It's pretty significant. Well, that's what I meant by dissing my former editors. They always wanted to know, was there any good news in the environment? In the back here, the lady second row back, or the very back row? You. Yes, stand up, please. There we go.
Hi, my name is Jennifer. I work on urban forestry issues, so I wanted to just add on to that is urban forestry and green infrastructure in our urban areas with 83+% of our population living there, something that's on your radar for climate change and for adaptability.
Where does urban forestry fit in the picture?
Are you asking me?
Anybody?
Well,
he was asking you.
Okay. Well, the kind of
we could ask Jessica.
So I was really talking about tropical deforestation, so I wouldn't put them in the same box. But urban greenery is very, very important, and I will just say that one of the I don't know if this is a story of 2016. For me, it was a story of 2015. I like to go. I don't know why, but I like to go dig around in the psychology journals and stuff. And there's actually this whole literature of how trees are good for your brain and good for your health that is coming into its own right now, and it seems to be fairly definitively shown that there are all these health and psychological benefits to having trees around you in urban areas. So that's just more momentum for any kind of urban greening that you can do. And of course, there are many other reasons to do it.
I will tell you that I wrote about a study once by a Forest Service scientist, of course has a vested interest, that drew a link between urban tree canopy in neighborhoods and crime rates. I found there was an inverse relationship. Not everybody buys that, but it's there. Down here. Yes, Cheryl.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Hogue with Chemical and Engineering News. And my question goes back to something that was brought up about the Zika virus. Now, that's pretty much a health issue, but it has a lot of environmental impacts that could go about it. I don't know if you think that the release of genetically modified mosquitoes and the use of greater use of pesticides, especially older ones like DDT, which are very effective against mosquitoes, but have a whole environmental profile or toxicity of their own, will come to the fore this year. Thanks.
Any Zika virus, mosquito-borne illness?
Well, it's definitely going to be on the radar. It already is on the radar, in a big way. Yeah, I think that the general sense that I get from the public health folks is that they feel like mosquito control has been ignored and neglected, and now everyone's like, wow, we ignored and neglected it.
This is West Nile virus times 10, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So exactly what route is going to be taken to redress that. It's probably going to be different in different countries, which is already the case with the genetically modified mosquito, where it's advancing further and faster in Brazil, not surprisingly. That's going to be important to watch. I mean, I'm not covering this. Actually, one of our freelancers was, but my understanding is that there are applications in the U.S., but I don't know where they stand. Obviously, you have to go through a regulatory process to do this.
We've got one of the questions from our online audience via Twitter. Mary Hoff with NCM Magazine asks if any of you can enlighten us more about the fate of the Toxic Substances Control Act. Will we get our act together? Inside humor. Yeah.
Yeah, the last I heard, we ran a story yesterday, and they're working on the preliminaries to set up a conference committee, and they want to work out the bigger issues kind of, among themselves before taking it to conference. And, of course, we heard that some folks want the broader bill, some folks want the more specific bill, but it seems that there's a commitment to make it happen. And then, on the conference committee, the House wants to do regular order and have everything be out in the open. So that kind of gives impetus to having some sort of conference committee to merge both versions.
So you think there's actually a chance it might get voted on?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Well, one of the most important issues to keep an eye on is what those bills would do to state authority. Like California has its own toxics program. It's much more advanced than what TSCA is. It has its Proposition 65 and things like that. So there's a lot of controversy about what reforming TSCA would do to the state's rights.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. In the middle back here, gentlemen, right there. Stand up. Stand up and I'll tell you if you're the one I'm pointing to. Yes, there you go.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is David Biederman with the Solid Waste Association of North America. I want to bring up a topic that no one's discussed yet, which is the topic of recycling. Uh-oh, the screen's going up. I better speak quickly, right?
We've still got 5 minutes, I believe.
My question is, there are some people, including a very prominent New York Times reporter, who claims that recycling is an organized religion and is something we shouldn't be doing, and views it as a cult. And then we have people here in the United States who think zero waste is the place we should be going. And I'm wondering what the people up on the stage think about that and that sort of dichotomy in thought about recycling.
Yes. What's your religion?
I do dabble in recycling.
As a writer or a consumer or both?
It's weekend stuff, just
Weekend
side projects. It's interesting. I don't cover as part of my beat the recycling issue, but somehow I was just talking about this yesterday with someone. So we all started somewhere, for me, maybe a little longer ago than some of you. And so one of the big debates that I followed, and Tim, you might remember this, when there was this mass burn incinerator project for Carroll County, and it was Carroll, Frederick, Howard, and I'm not sure about the fourth one. It might have been Cumberland or the next county, Washington County.
That wasn't so long ago.
So I was writing about this in 1988, 89. And so they were talking about it was going to cost, I think, probably tens of millions of dollars, but a 4-county compact, build this incinerator, truck the trash there, have a tipping fee for the landfills that, at some point you could count on all this trash, and theoretically it would, create enough power to offset all that. And I just think about recycling and how far we've gone. We've really gone to a point where there are articles sort of questioning the wisdom of all this focus on recycling. There was a time where there was great opposition to recycling in this country. And the idea was it might just be cheaper to burn all this trash, even though at some point they would have had, at least in this project, would surely have had to truck trash in from other jurisdictions to rationalize the capital cost up front. And so I think it's interesting we're at a point where we've moved sort of beyond recycling as the goal to reduction of product purchase use. It's something that's really big in Europe. It's second nature in a lot of ways, but in this country, there's still a lot of container packaging, and so I'm struck by where I live. Amazon is this company that delivers products to you. You can order it online, and so every day in my building, they have this mammoth pile of boxes. Deliveries, boxes from Amazon. So one day I said, it's an enormous amount of boxes that you're logging in for the residents here. Is that typical for a day? There was like 45 boxes, 50 maybe. And she said, no, it's just this delivery. There's 3 or 4 of these deliveries a day. And so people are now ordering toilet paper and dish soap and diapers, and this is going to, I think, completely transform what we're talking about with recycling. If people are going to order the thing they buy at the store, but it comes in a box, then it's probably something someone's going to have to reckon with at some point.
A lot more waste to have to deal with, either recycling or burning. I
Well,
just ordered just a little humorous aside, I just ordered a new handle for my toilet, right? This big. Came in a box this big.
It's the packaging.
It was protected. So you had a serious
I
thought.
think most of you are probably unaware that whole controversy about whether recycling is worth our time or not, or whether it's a big scam, began in 1996. That's when the New York Times Magazine did its cover story on that. It's an issue that still has not gone away. It's been 20 years.
Mm-hmm. True that. All right. Right here in the fourth row back, blue shirt, I think. Distinguished-looking gentleman.
Thanks. Appreciate that. Ron White, with the Center for Effective Government. One of the big stories in the last couple of years that I didn't hear mentioned, and it's probably because what was mentioned before about oil prices, is fracking. And the issue is not so much the decline in the fracking industry, but what the implications are ahead in terms of all of the abandoned tens of thousands of fracking sites and the potential health and environmental implications of that, and whether folks see that as an issue that deserves attention. And the other issue that I just want to mention, since I'm up here already, is the whole issue of chemicals facility and safety. And we're coming up on the 3rd anniversary of the West Texas disaster that killed 15 people. There's a rule that actually didn't get mentioned earlier that EPA is working on in terms of their risk management plan. And I'm wondering if folks think that's going to be a story to follow this year.
What's fracking? Why has that not been brought up yet?
I think there'll definitely be more scrutiny on fracking. It seemed like, several years ago, of course there's been a lot of scrutiny on fracking, but several years ago we were talking, for example, well, all this gas is making it possible to lower emissions, switch a lot of power plants from coal to natural gas. So it was something that the administration appeared to be embracing completely. And the folks who wanted more scrutiny on fracking were kind of, a certain subset of folks on the left. And now what I'm seeing is that that's growing, and the administration recently has been, more vocal about the need to scrutinize fracking, and the presidential candidates on the Democratic side have also been a little bit more vocal. So I think there's been some movement on that, and I would suspect that there'll be more.
Is that a growing realization of its safety and environmental hazards, or is that just a recognition that economically right now it isn't all as important as it used to be?
I think it's a little bit of both in terms of, I think a lot of the economics have allowed regulators to have given regulators more leeway than they would have had if coal was still doing really well, and the Obama administration was able to reject the Keystone XL pipeline because the way the market's going. And it seems that with natural gas, it's the same way.
Mm-hmm.
The industry is a little bit down, and regulators can do more.
Okay. We have another question from our Twitter following. This one's from Claire August, I believe. And this is, we're getting into the sort of put on your, your wizard hat here. On a global scale, what country will do the most this year to combat climate change? What country will do the most?
Well, one of the leaders has been Costa Rica.
Really?
It's done quite a bit. We had a story by Craig Welch about that. The things it's doing as far as trying to get its traffic management under control, its forest issues. I think it's one of those countries that didn't get enough attention in Paris for some of the things that it was doing.
A small country, but it's taking this
Right.
more seriously than
Right.
many of the larger ones.
I mean, you're not going to get the tons of emissions reduction that you're going to get in another country, but as far as a country that is taking it seriously.
I'm not an expert on what's happening in China, but definitely there was some suggestion that when a recent paper was published, I think it was in December, saying that greenhouse gas emissions had either global greenhouse gas emissions had either stayed flat from 2014 to 2015 or gone down a little bit in 2015. And I believe they were attributing it to less coal use in China. So I mean, if that continues, the potential there for doing something different is very, very big.
But their growth in renewables is outpacing that coal production.
Yeah. So I mean, the United States is, again, we had something pretty interesting happen in 2015 where in the electricity sector, we also reduced emissions, it looks like, by a couple %. And that's also seems to be related to a coal, natural gas kind of switch. So if that continues, that could be.
I think you can't go wrong to any question by saying Canada. Canada.
Is that because they've done so little so far?
Whatever the question
well,
is,
Canada
Canada.
did so little under the Harbour administration.
Exactly.
but now
So
with the new
I would
administration-
I would at least give them a nomination for that happened
Most
while
improved.
we were in, I think, the climate talks in
It's like, what are
Bonn.
the metrics for how you decide that?
Yeah, so that's a big change. And I just wanted to say, I've been racking my brain for two things that are hopeful for Andrew. Because I thought that's terrible that we didn't come up with a lot of hope. It seems, so far I've got the reduced costs of solar and wind technologies. And the other thing is that whether good or bad, the Paris Agreement is rooted in the ability of the next generation, or the generation that's right behind me, I don't know, that's the next generation, to push for great political change. It will succeed or fail based on that, but it's sort of uniquely suited for, because countries make their pledges to respond to ground up pressure from people, from citizenry, to push for more aggressive action. But because it depends on that that sort of political pressure, I think the hope, if you're looking for it, would be in young people.
Very good. And now one last question, and this one is really going to stump you all. Who's going to win the Super Bowl this year? No, okay. Well, maybe that's too easy. How about next year? All right. You want to stick your neck out? Anybody? We promise to have the forum before the Super Bowl next year, so you won't be embarrassed. They'll forget it by then.
I'll go with the San Diego Chargers.
There you
well,
go.
Soon to be LA.
Oh, yeah. I'd have to go with the Bears because I'm going for the Bears and the Cubs this year.
All right. Okay. No favorites. Okay. Well, there you have it. Those are the predictions for this year. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, thank you. Please, a big round of applause for the panel and also for Jessica. I want to say thank you especially to our reception supporters. Please join us in the dining room for some drinks and snacks, courtesy of the Nature Conservancy, Environmental Law Institute, Resource Media, Bloomberg BNA, and the Science and Technology Innovation Program. And there'll be folks from all of these organizations at the receptions who can tell you more about their work. So join me again in saying thanks, and please thank you for coming to the Wilson Center, and stay warm. Okay.
Yeah. No one likes politics. I said no one likes politics.
Some tough questions.
Nice job, everybody. Terrific.